Welcome to our discussion on principles of economics, and we are discussing some important problems and their solutions so that we can understand how to use the concepts that we have learned in this course to apply in some practical problems, right. So, we will start with a problem that discusses about some important government policies or government interventions in the market outcome. So, the problem is like this: the government has decided that the free market price for cheese is too low. Okay? Suppose the government imposes a binding price floor in the cheese market, then the question is you have to draw a supply and demand diagram to show the effect of this policy on the price of cheese and the quantity of cheese sold, and then is there a shortage or surplus of cheese after this government intervention. So, this is basically price flooring, right. So, to understand this, let us first draw the demand and supply. Let us say that this is demand and this is supply and this is equilibrium quantity and this is equilibrium price. So, this P star, the equilibrium price for cheese is very low, that is what government is thinking, and then the government is trying to set a binding price floor. Now, we need to understand what does it mean. So, price floor, should the floor price be lower than P star or higher than P star, that we need to understand. So, here if the equilibrium price itself is too low, then there is no point in setting a price floor which is again lower than P star, isn't it? If you do so, if the government sets a floor price which is again lower than P star, that is called non-binding price floor, because anyway P star is very low and you are setting a price which is again lower than the P star. So, that won't serve the purpose. So, that is why we say that setting a price floor lower than the equilibrium is not binding. So, if you want to set a binding price floor, that must be set above the equilibrium price. So, let us say that this PF, this is the floor price. Okay. So, PF must be greater than P star for binding price floor, that we have to keep in mind. Okay. Now, this is the diagram, and from the diagram itself it is very clear whether there is shortage or surplus. So, at PF the supply is up to the point, let us say this is B, but the demand for cheese is determined by the point A. So, that means supply is much more than the demand. So, it creates a surplus in the market. So, this is the surplus actually. So, a binding price floor is actually creating a surplus of cheese in the cheese market. Then the next question: farmers complain that the price floor has reduced their total revenue. Is this possible? If yes, we need to explain. So, when there is a surplus in the market, price is increasing. So, what will happen to the revenue for the farmers? Now, when price is increasing, as you see from the diagram, quantity demand is falling, but the question is total revenue, as we know the total revenue equals to price into quantity. So, here quantity demand is falling, price is increasing. So, the relative strength of the increase in price and decrease in quantity will determine whether net impact on the total revenue will be positive or negative, right, that we have learned earlier. Now, look at the nature of the product. Here we are discussing cheese. Generally, we have discussed earlier that the agricultural product, they are inelastic in demand. But here is the product we are talking about, cheese, which is generally a demand for cheese is basically elastic in nature, because if there are price increase, we may think of reducing the demand for cheese to a larger extent. So, it is an elastic demand. So, assuming that demand for cheese is elastic, what will happen? Increase in price will result in quantity demand to decline more than proportionate, and therefore, total revenue will also fall. So, this farmer's complaint could be possible provided the demand for cheese is elastic. That is what we need to understand. So, without knowing the nature of the demand for elasticity of demand for cheese, we cannot answer this question. If the demand for cheese happens to be inelastic, then a rise in price will result in decline in quantity demand less than proportionate. So, total revenue will increase. So, here farmers' complaint is that total revenue falls. So, that means the assumption is that elasticity of demand for cheese is greater than 1. Okay. So, that means this is elastic demand that we are talking about. This is the assumption that we make. If that is the case, then there is a possibility that when price increases, quantity demand will fall more than proportionate, and which is generally the case. Demand for cheese, because we have too many substitutes rather than consuming too much of cheese when it is increasing, actually price is increasing. So, in response to the farmers' complaints, the government now agrees to buy all the surplus cheese at the floor price. Compared to the basic price floor, who benefits from new policy and who loses? So, price is increasing, quantity demand falls, therefore, there would be some unsold cheese in the cheese market, that is why there is a surplus, and that is the reason the revenue for the farmer is falling. Now, if the government purchases all this surplus cheese, obviously, now it would be beneficial for the producers, because they are getting a higher price for their product and they are able to sell all the surplus also. Earlier the price was P star, now it is PF. Since PF is greater than P star and government is assuring that government will buy all the surplus, then the producers is actually benefiting. Okay. So, producers actually benefits from this policy, producers benefit. right, because as P f is greater than P star and all the surplus is also sold out. But what is happening to the consumer? Consumers are now paying a higher price and are able to consume less. Therefore, this is a loss for the consumer. If you look at consumer surplus, which was earlier above the price line P star below the demand curve, was much more, but now this is going to be the consumer surplus above the price line P f, but below the demand curve. So, that means producers benefit, consumers lose. Consumers they lose. And see, when the government is buying this extra cheese, so who will finance the government to buy all this? It is the taxpayers' money. So, that means the taxpayers also, the taxpayers are also losing as they finance the government to buy the surplus. So, this is an example of price flooding. So, that means basically the price control. We have learned that in market outcomes sometimes government can do better by intervening in the market, and this is one way of intervention. When the market price is too low, government intervene and they set a price which is binding, and P f is the price floor. So, that is what we have learned. Now, let us come to the next question. A recent study found that the demand and supply schedule for Frisbees are as follows. So, Frisbees, as you know, that is a kind of disc that we throw. Okay, it is used for games, some kind of games and sports purposes. Frisbees, it has another application to understand the aerodynamics. So, when you are throwing the frisbee, so it tells us the aerodynamics in that particular place. So, here we have information on price per frisbees, quantity demanded in million and quantity supplied in million. For example, when price per frisbee is $11, the quantity sold is 1,000,000, quantity supplied is, quantity demanded is only 1,000,000, but supply is 15,000,000. Likewise, when it is 10, then demand is 2, the supply is 12. So, this is the schedule, demand schedule and supply schedule, price also is given. Now, the question is, first question, what is the equilibrium price and quantity of frisbees? So, from this schedule you need to understand what is the equilibrium, price and quantity. So, equilibrium means, as we have learned, that equilibrium price also is also known as market clearing price. Okay? Equilibrium is also known as market clearing. That means, at that price quantity demanded and quantity sold should be same. So, that is why equilibrium price implies market clearing. Market clearing price. So, this implies demand equals to supply. So, if you look at the demand schedule, then you can easily understand when the price is $8 per Frisbee, you see quantity demanded is 6, quantity supply is also 6. So, that means demand equals to supply is achieved when the price per Frisbee is 8. So, the first question is then equilibrium price is $8 per Frisbee and quantity sold or quantity demanded is 6, quantity supplied is also 6. We can easily understand. Now, the Frisbee manufacturers, they persuade the government that the Frisbee production improves scientists' understanding of aerodynamics and thus is important for national security. A concerned Congress votes to impose a price floor of $2 above the equilibrium price. What is the new market price? How many Frisbee are sold? Okay. So, Frisbee manufacturers, they formed a lobby. We discussed that sometimes the sellers, if they feel the market outcome is not in their favor, they can form some kind of lobby and then they put this argument to the government. Frisbee manufacturing is very important for the scientists to understand aerodynamics. So, therefore, it is important for national security and therefore, why do not you increase the price of Frisbee to protect the Frisbee manufacturers. And what is the increase? They are suggested you can impose a price floor of $2 above the equilibrium price. Okay. So, above the equilibrium price means now price should be 10, this would be the price, this is the PF, we can say the price floor. Floor price is now PF and at that quantity demanded is only 2, quantity supplied is actually 12. So, at that how many Frisbees are sold? 2 means 2 million actually, 2 million Frisbees are sold. Then the next question, the irate college students march on Washington and demand a reduction in the price of Frisbees. An even more concerned Congress votes to repeal the price floor and imposes a price ceiling of $1 below the former price floor. What is the new market price? How many Frisbees are sold? Okay. So, here $1 below the floor price. So, that means floor price is 10 and $1 below the floor price is 9, that is the price floor. But the question is this price reduction, so is this price ceiling, is this price ceiling binding or not? What we have discussed earlier, that for having a binding price ceiling or price floor, we need to compare this with the equilibrium price. Equilibrium price was $8 per Frisbee and now the ceiling price is 9. After students march, they protested, they demanded a reduction in Frisbee price. So, $1 reduction, that is the price ceiling. Since it is again above the equilibrium price which was $8 per Frisbee, that means it is not a binding price ceiling. So, what will happen? The price would be same as $8 only, because that is the equilibrium price. Okay. So, a price ceiling, what is the new market price? new market price would be $8 only, as the price ceiling is non-binding. At $9 is non-binding. So, for price ceiling to be binding, it should be lower than the equilibrium price. Okay, it should be lower. If it is higher, then there is no point. Similarly, for price floor to be binding, it should be higher than the equilibrium price. That is what we are discussing. Non-binding. So, therefore, quantity demand equals to quantity supply would be the 6 million only, which was there earlier. So, imposition of price ceiling is not able to change the market outcome, since it is set above the equilibrium price. Now, we will discuss some important policies, government policies, which is tax and subsidy, right. These are all very important. So, if the government places a $500 tax on luxury cars, will the price paid by the consumers rise by more than $500, less than $500, or exactly $500? We have to explain. Now, from the theory of taxation, what we have learned, that let us say this is the demand and this is the demand for luxury car, this is the supply of luxury car, and this is equilibrium price, quantity and price. If we assume that the tax is imposed on the seller, then what happens is the supply curve will shift upward, okay? Demand will remain unchanged. If we assume that the tax is imposed on the buyers, then demand curve will shift rightward, right? Demand curve will shift rightward. So, but the thing is, what we have learned, that consequence of taxation, it does not depend whether the tax is imposed on the buyer or the seller, that we have learned, right. Okay. So, after taxation, the price paid by the buyer increases, price paid by the received by the seller decreases. So, this is PB and this is PS. PB is the price paid by the buyers, PS is price received by the sellers, and the difference between PB and PS is the tax. That is what we have learned, and this is the tax revenue earned by the government. So, that means after imposition of tax amount T, see, the consumers are paying a higher price. It is not that they are paying the same price. So, PB is actually greater than P star. PB is greater than P star, there is absolutely no doubt. but the difference between PB and P star is not T. So, PB minus PS is actually not equals to T. That means the PB has not increased, PB does not increase by the entire tax amount. So, sellers also do share a portion of the tax burden, because earlier the sellers were receiving P star, now they are receiving PS, which is lower than P star. So, that means the difference between PB and PS is T, this is T. So, that means this diagram itself says that no, even if the $500 of tax is imposed on the luxury cars, neither the buyer nor the seller is going to bear the entire tax burden. How much the buyer will bear, how much the seller will bear, so that means that is called incidence of taxation, depends on the relative slope of the demand and supply. What I am saying? Incidence of taxation depends on relative slope of demand and supply. In extreme cases, let us assume that the supply is perfectly elastic. That means, when the tax is imposed, suppliers will be able to bypass the entire tax burden to the consumers. So, supply is perfectly elastic, right. So, that means you can make the supply curve flat, perfectly elastic. In that case, if supply is perfectly elastic, if supply is perfectly elastic or demand is perfectly inelastic, then only the price paid by the consumer will rise by $500. Otherwise, in standard cases, the price will not rise by $500, that we have to keep in mind. Okay? So, that means perfect elastic or perfectly inelastic, these are all theoretical possibilities. It is very rare, it is impossible to get a product for which supply is perfectly elastic and demand is perfectly inelastic. So, these are all theoretical possibilities. If that happens, then only after imposition of tax, the price paid by the supplier or paid by the consumers will rise by exactly by the tax amount. Otherwise, a portion of the tax burden will be shared by both consumer and the producer, and who will share how much, that depends on relative slope of the demand and supply, that means relative elasticity basically. Higher the elasticity, lower would be the tax burden for that particular party, because elasticity ultimately it measures responsiveness. So, if you are quite responsive for a price change due to taxation, then you will try to bypass the burden to the other party. That is the idea. Okay. Now, this is another interesting example. So, the question is, suppose the market for ice cream is described by the following demand and supply. Demand is given by 300 minus P, supply is given by Qs equals to 2P. So, find out the equilibrium price and quantity. Okay. So, that means how do you get equilibrium price and quantity? You have to just solve these two. So, 300 minus P equals to 2P. By equating QD equals to QS implies this. So, that means 3P equals to 300, that means P equals to 100. So, this is I call P star, and this implies Q star would be how much? If you put here 100, then Q star equals to 2 into 100 equals to 200. This is the equilibrium price and quantity. Okay. So, this is an application of the theory we have just discussed. So, now a tax of rupees 6 is imposed on every unit of ice cream sold. The question is, who is going to share the larger burden of tax, buyer or the seller? Give explanation for your guess. So, without solving anything, you need to guess. Okay? You need to guess who is going to bear the larger burden. So, what is the theory just we have explained? If you recall, we said that incidence of taxation depends on the relative slope of the demand and supply. Okay. So, from the demand function, what we can understand that dP dQ. So, from here P equals to, we can understand that 300 minus Q D. This implies dP dQ is minus 1. From the supply, 2P equals to Q S, or P equals to half of Q S. So, dP dQ equals to half. So, elasticity is basically the inverse of the slope multiplied by the price quantity ratio. So, since the slope here, look at the slope of the demand curve is 1, but the slope of the supply curve is half. So, that means supply curve is relatively flatter. Okay? Supply is relatively flatter compared to the demand, and as a result of which suppliers or producers are more elastic, because elasticity is inverse of the slope multiplied by the price quantity. So, minus 1 is the slope of the demand, 2 is the slope of the supply, that we have derived. So, since the supply function is more elastic compared to the demand, our guess is that suppliers will bear less burden of taxation. So, from there what we can understand, since the supply function is relatively elastic, relatively more elastic compared to demand, our guess is that consumers will bear the larger part of tax. That is our guess. Okay. Now, we have to prove whether our guess is true or not. So, let us assume that the tax is imposed on the buyer. So, in that case, let us assume tax is imposed on the buyer. In that case, QD would be 300 minus P plus 6 and QS remain unchanged. QS is same to P. Okay. Since the imposition of tax does not change the ultimate outcome of taxation, you can either assume tax is imposed on buyer or is imposed on seller. Okay. So, here we are assuming that it is imposed on the buyer. So, the price paid by the buyer will increase, that is why the quantity demand is 300 minus P plus 6. So, if that is the case, supply remain unchanged. If you equate, then what will happen? 300 minus P minus 6 equals to 2P, or 294 equals to 3P. This implies P equals to now 98. Okay, is now 98. So, we need to now understand, is this P is PB or PS, right? There is a trick to understand. So, we should not get confused, because here we are unable to understand after solving this. Since we assume in this case that the tax is imposed on the buyer, you will be tempted to write this as PB, but that is not the case, because before imposition of tax, look at the equilibrium price, that was 100. So, after imposition of tax, the price paid by the consumer cannot be less than what they are paying earlier. So, therefore, we have to be careful after getting the price, whether we are getting this is PB or PS, that depends on what was the equilibrium price. This price is actually lower than what they were paying earlier, therefore, this is only PS. So, price paid by the supplier is 98. So, obviously, what should be the PB then? How do you get the PB? Again, the theory says the difference between PB and PS is 6, or the tax amount. Since this is 98, so of course, the PB should be 104. Okay. So, this way we have to explain. How do you get this? Since PB minus PS equals to 6, that is helping actually. Okay. Is this clear? So, we assume the tax is imposed on the buyer, therefore, the price becomes 300 minus P plus 6 and supply remains unchanged, and therefore, PS after solving this, when we get the P equals to 98, since this is less than the equilibrium price. So, that means this is the price received by the seller and price paid by the buyer is 104. So, the next question is then find out the price paid by the buyer, received by the seller, and quantity sold in the post tax situation. So, quantity sold, when this is PB and PS we have found out. So, then what should be the quantity sold in the market? That you can find out as you can take this quantity sold in the market is 2 into quantity sold equals to 2 into 98 equals to 196. So, earlier it was 200. So, obviously, in the post tax situation the quantity sold is 196, that means 4 unit less than what they were selling earlier. Okay. Calculate the consumer surplus, producer surplus and tax revenue. Now, to calculate consumer surplus, producer surplus and tax revenue, we need to draw the diagram again. So, here let us draw the diagram. So, this is Q, this is P, demand, this is let us say supply, and we know that this is PB, this is PS, this is the tax revenue, and this is the deadweight loss, right. So, this is basically 200 equilibrium quantity, this is 196, okay, in the post tax situation. All right. So, what is the question they are asking? Consumer surplus. So, consumer surplus is basically this area, this is consumer surplus. So, to find out the consumer surplus, that means half into base into height. So, we need to know what is this, right. Now, from the demand function, how do you get the y intercept? Y, please keep in mind one important thing that I am discussing here. The y intercept of the demand function shows a price at which quantity demand is 0. This is called choked price. You know the demand function 300 minus P plus 6, sorry 300 minus P actually. This is the demand function 300 minus P, okay, this is the demand function. Now, if I set this equals to 0, a price at which quantity demand equals to 0, 300 minus P. So, that means I can say that P choked, I am writing choked, equals to 300. Okay. So, if price goes to 300 per unit, then there would be no demand for the product. So, this is 300, this is 300, PB we know is 104, okay. PB is 104 that we have found out. So, that means the difference between 300 and PB is the height. So, half consumer surplus equals to half into base is this. What is this distance? This distance is 196, 196 into the height. Height is basically 300 minus what is the PB? PB is 104. This is the consumer surplus. So, there is a trick here. The trick is consumer surplus is this triangle and the formula is half into base into height. So, base we already know, post tax situation, what is the quantity demand, that is the base of this triangle. Please look at once again. This is 196, okay. This is 196 we have found out. To find out the height of this triangle, we need to find out the choked price at which quantity demand is actually 0. And from the demand function, if we put 0 over here, we get the choked price as 300. So, that means height of the triangle is 300 minus this PB, which is 196, 104. Okay. So, consumer surplus is this. Similarly, the producer surplus equals to half into this triangle. This is producer surplus. So, half into base into height. So, what is the base? Base is again 196 and what is the height? Height is basically PS and PS is 98 we know. PS is 98, this distance, this triangle I am talking about, half into base into height. And what is the deadweight loss? This is basically the deadweight loss DWL. So, deadweight loss to find out, this is half into base into this height, this is the base. So, base is here, how much is the base? Base is basically the difference between PB and PS. So, half into, so deadweight loss equals to half into this height. So, this base which is nothing but the difference between PB and PS, half into what is PB? PB here is 104, PS is 98. So, half into PB minus PS is basically tax amount. So, PB minus PS into this height, height is basically the difference between the quantity sold post taxation, quantity sold pre taxation, which is 200 minus 196 is 4. And half into PB minus PS is again tax amount into 4, which is half into 6 into 4. So, equals to 12. Consumer surplus is 12. Okay. So, deadweight loss, you please go back to the theory. So, deadweight loss is basically, deadweight loss means this triangle I am talking about, this triangle and this triangle, how do you find? half into this is the base, and the base is nothing but the difference between PB and PS. This is the height. Height is nothing but the quantity sold pre-taxation, quantity sold post-taxation, which is 4. So, half into base is basically the tax amount, and the height is the 200 minus 96 4. So, this is how you can find out the deadweight loss. So, we have found out everything: consumer surplus, producer surplus, tax revenue, deadweight loss, everything. Okay. Now, you come to next question. This is the question of a subsidy. Now, subsidy is just the opposite of taxation. Let us now assume that the earlier case a tax was imposed on ice cream, but here now a subsidy is given. Let us say that this is the demand and supply of ice cream cone. This is the demand, this is the supply, this is the equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price. So, when subsidy is given, what will happen to the demand? So, obviously, for each price, now the consumers are ready to pay $0.5 extra, because that is the subsidy. So, the mechanism would be just opposite. A tax results in demand curve to shift leftward, reduction in demand. A subsidy results in demand to rise. Let us say this one. Because for each price consumers are ready to pay $0.5 extra. So, it is just the opposite. Then in case of taxation, what we saw, that price paid by the buyers was increasing, price received by the seller was actually decreasing. So, here what will happen? Price paid by the buyers will come down. So, this is PB, this is PS, and the difference between PS, your PS is greater than PB in case of subsidy. In case of subsidy, and the difference between PS minus PB equals to the subsidy. Okay. So, who is better off here? Suppliers are better off, because they are getting a price which is higher than the equilibrium price what they are receiving earlier. So, PS is greater than P star. So, supplier are better off. PB is less than P star. So, consumers are also better off. But the government is worse off actually, because government has to pay additional money for this subsidy. And ultimately, who is paying for this subsidy? It is basically the taxpayers' money. maybe government is using the tax revenue generated from somewhere else to subsidize this ice cream. So, government is also. And the taxpayers. So, both consumers and producers, they are better off in case of subsidy, just the opposite of taxation, because in taxation both consumers and producers were worse off. Government was getting tax revenue, here government is spending, producers and consumers are better off. Okay? That is the case of subsidy we need to keep in mind. Then the last question of today's discussion, an adverse climatic condition spoiled sugarcane production in Maharashtra, let us say. What happens to consumer surplus in sugarcane market? Let us say this is the market for sugarcane. Supply, demand. So, when there is adverse condition or climatic condition, supply this is the equilibrium price and quantity, and this entire area is consumer surplus, that we know. So, when there is adverse climatic condition, what will happen? Supply function will shift upward from S to S1, price will go up, quantity demand will fall, price will go up, quantity demand falls. So, as a result of which you see consumer surplus is going down. So, a fall in consumer surplus CS due to fall in sugarcane production. Now, what will happen to the consumer surplus in sugar market? Assuming that sugarcane is one of the main ingredient of, this is market for sugar, this is market for sugarcane. So, again demand and supply of sugar. So, of course, when the supply function shifts upward for sugar, price goes up for sugarcane. So, that means the input price of sugar is increasing. So, as a result of which the supply for sugar also will go down. Earlier this was the equilibrium quantity for sugar, this is price, and then this is Q double star, price is increasing for sugar as well, and consumer surplus is falling. So, again a fall in CS, consumer surplus, in sugar market as well. This is how we need to analyze. These are all related market. So, just opposite will happen. If there is a good monsoon, production of sugarcane will increase, price will fall, consumer surplus will increase. An increased production of sugarcane will result in fall in the price of sugarcane, cost of production for sugar will decrease, supply of sugar will increase, as a result of which price will go down for sugar, consumer surplus will go up. So, this is how we can see that the consequence of consumer surplus is not restricted only in sugarcane market, it will go down to the other related markets as well. Okay. So, these are the examples that we have discussed mainly on government policies and consumer and producer surplus, right, important government policies and market outcome. These examples, if you go through, that will strengthen your understanding of the concepts that we have learned earlier while discussing about demand, supply, consumer surplus and producer surplus. With this, I am closing my discussion today. Thank you.